What's going on, everybody? Patrick Connor here, and welcome to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast. If you are a new viewer or listener, what is up? And if you're a return viewer or listener, hey, welcome back. Here with my buddy Aris Pina. We are here to talk some boxing history, kind of a blend of true crime, not really crime so much, is just like a mini biography, I guess you could call it. But Aris, what's going on, bro?
What's going on, man? It's been a while.
It's been a minute, there's various life bull crap that's been going down, and
Exactly.
nobody wants to hear about that shit, but
Life has been life.
nonetheless,
But we cool.
we're here, we're back, we're
And
live, barely.
see the Ring magazine behind you poking out right there on Michael Grant and Galata. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it's actually a wonder there's not like more that might get cropped out on the final video, but just rest assured, if you can't see it on the final video, there's like fucking a throne of magazines around me and shit. But that's just how we do it. That's we're boxing history geeks. And look, I just wanted to say real quick before we get into what we're about to talk about today, I will say this. I've noticed lately in the last few months, maybe year or so, a lot of bullshit boxing historians popping up on social media and shit like that. These guys fucking suck, man. I'm just gonna fucking put that out there. I respect the fact that a lot more people are talking history, and there are a lot of people that I respect in those circles, but there's a really kind of like watered down social mediaized version, memeified version of history that's been going around for quite a while now. Seems to kind of be overtaking the actual history and discussions and stuff like that. And I guess I just wanted to say that's kind of what we're trying to offer here is we're having a real-time discussion about stuff we mostly already know about, although we're also learning about and stuff like that too. And that's not to say, hey, we're the only ones that can have this discussion or we're the only ones that can have the real discussion. Look, dude, there's a lot of people out there with curiosity, a lot of people with ability, talent, and things like that who are interested in history. I'm just saying, don't get, fooled by the nonsense. That being said, we are going to be talking a little bit of nonsense today, except not in the same way that it's like not true or anything, but just crazy shit, dude. That's one of the things that we really like to do when we talk, when we kind of go outside the realm of modern boxing or outside the normal realm of like talking about a popular fighter or a specific fight or something like that. When we do true crime, I think we like to try to do some of the stories that might not be as well known. So today we're going to be talking about a funky dude, a guy from the Miami scene in the 1970s and 1980s named Al Migliorato. That might already being like, what? Who? What? That's probably the appropriate response. So we're going to try to break down the who and what a little bit today, but give you a moment to go ahead and look that up on BoxRec. But in the meanwhile, Eris, weird story, bro.
Extremely, and this is the type of stuff that you and I kind of actually excel at because the more obscure and different out there, it's it becomes more intriguing because Al Migliorato is one of those characters that like he was never going to become a world champion. He was a heavyweight during the 70s, the deepest era in boxing history, but he was a character during a time that boxing had tons of them. You know what I mean? Whether you knew them or not, because they were always a lot of them kind of localized or behind the scenes or whatever. But they've been written about, and there's lore about them and such. And especially in the Miami scene, there has been a lot of characters and shady individuals and famous trainers and cutmen and other ones very localized that are over there that are still talked about today by people that, had the chance to see them maybe in the twilight of their lives or whatever, of those people's lives or whatever it was, you know what I mean? But the stories are still out there. And that being said, Migliorato was one of those guys that his story is an extremely interesting one. Coming from the Miami boxing scene of the 70s, which is already a murky place to begin with. I mean, boxing in the 70s and the 80s already it was just like a was an interesting time because aside from like the big names and the high profile fights and all that, boxing still was still a uh still, not really regulated sport back then, especially in different jurisdictions. No one really gave a shit, right? You know what I mean? It's kind of like you can kind of still do whatever you wanted. I mean, to a degree, you still can it's still like that, in certain places today, but like especially back then. And you just had a whole host of like various fighters that you don't really knew their backstory showing up randomly, usually ending up at the Dundee's, Chris and Angelo Dundee's Fifth Street Gym And yeah, it kind of goes from there. So Migliorato is one of the guys that plays a pivotal, I wouldn't say a pivotal role, but he plays an interesting role in the Miami scene of that era.
I think, needless to say, you say the name Angelo Dundee, or if you even say the name Chris Dundee, if you didn't already know, you might be like, Dundee, like I know that last name. But Chris and Angelo Dundee were a pair of brothers from Philly, of course, a legendary fight town going back more than 100 years. And I don't even know why they relocated to Miami. I couldn't really say, but at some point they did relocate to Miami. I think it was like in their 20s or something like that. And Chris established and ran the Fifth Street Gym in Miami, which of course is still running, but in a different location now. They reopened it; it shut, and they had reopened it, which is now in a different location. But even at the time, was a very popular gym. You also kind of have to understand that right around this time in the 1970s was around the kind of emergence of, I guess that I don't want to say beach lifestyle, but a more kind of glamorous, I guess, model kind of beach lifestyle, especially in Miami. By the time that Miami Vice came around in the 1980s, like that was after it had already, that was like when it was peaking. You know what I mean? It had already been going around for a while. Scarface, for instance, like kind of think like that. And when a lot of like beachy type of locations and locales were getting really popular in the 1970s, Miami also kind of emerged in that regard in terms of boxing. But a lot of that is, I think, I would imagine, because the weather's nice, it's a cool place to hang out, a lot of beautiful people, etc. And like there's also a pretty decent amount of talent. A lot of the outlying areas, the talent's going to kind of go toward the major cities and stuff like that. So, long story short, like you opened up saying with the heavyweights of the 1970s, that's like really the name of the game here, dude. That era was massive, it was popular. There were so many names and stars and competitive fights and stuff like that. But also, Al Migliorato starting out his career in the early 1970s, just in terms of the time frame. You know what I mean? You have to think about what else is going on in the heavyweight division. He wasn't a very big heavyweight, so it's almost kind of like a mystery. Like, why would this dude be trying to compete at heavyweight? Because he's only like 6 feet tall or something like that. But 6 feet tall white dude who was like tops, like what was he, 190 pounds or 100 and
I
yeah,
mean, he'd totally be a cruiserweight today in
yeah,
a small.
185. Not a
Yeah.
big guy whatsoever. However, in the late 1960s with Muhammad Ali and all of the drama surrounding him being excommunicated and basically exiled or whatever you want to call it as heavyweight champion. There was so much going on socially at this time. Muhammad Ali was really, regardless of his situation and the unfairness of it, which it obviously was, it was also a massive drama. A lot of people were paying attention to boxing because of it.
Mhm.
And so, because of his exile, even though Joe Frazier was obviously a fucking monster, the heavyweight division was seen as a lot more wide open. It was a lot more there, like that shit was there to be taken. The sanctioning organizations had split up the heavyweight title. So again, that's more opportunities potentially to become a heavyweight champion or to win a title, et cetera, et cetera. So in any case, it makes sense, I suppose, that you'd try to make a run for it if you potentially could, and especially if you wind up magically hooking up with the Dundees. But it's funny because it took me a little bit. I tried to figure out like, all right, what's going on with his with his home life? Like, is there anything about his, kind of biography and stuff like that? There wasn't a whole lot, but I did actually find an interview with him from pretty early on in his career, and what this kind of show actually got sparked from. We've talked about him before, like on numerous occasions, just because we are weird like that. But also the other day, I was going through some of the magazines and I just happened to come across the issue in what was it, 1974 or whatever it was. I think it's like December 1974 or something like that issue of The Ring. And as I was flipping through, there was first of all an old photo of Danny Lopez that was really good, and I was like, oh shit, that's nice. And I flipped a couple pages, and there's Al Migliorato at like 20-0 or something like that, looking kind of young. And I was like, oh shit, he's under the new faces section in this issue of The Ring, meaning they're kind of their prospects or whatever, their prospects to look out for and stuff like that. And so, in any case, there was not really much information on there about who he is or what's going on. But then I finally found this interview from a couple months before then, where he talks about that his childhood actually wasn't, you know, he didn't have a bad childhood. He didn't come from a bad background. He didn't have a bad family, blah, blah, blah. You know, his parents were supportive of him. He's quote unquote a good Catholic kid, etc. So, how he kind of fell into this scene or whatever he never really explained. He said he went to a Catholic school. Here, I can't really read shit here, but let me go ahead and slide on my 43-year-old fucking eyes glasses. They say a fighter has to have a tough life, a lot of hard knocks. I had a good home life, a good Catholic boy. I went to Catholic school. I had good parents, but nobody wants the title more than I do. So in any case, after that, he was actually supposed to fight Charlie Clark, who was one of Joe Frazier's sparring partners for a long time and kind of like a journeyman around that time. And it might have been, you know, a decent measuring stick for where Migliorato was at that time. But in any case, that fight didn't wind up coming off. Point is, that's really the only thing I could find about his childhood or background that he talks about, at least within a decent amount of time researching. Otherwise, I couldn't really find shit. But so going from that point, you know, the start of his career to when, you know, he's considered a hot prospect as a heavyweight. I mean, you just look at his record, dude. There's not really much recognizable on there. There's not much going on that really makes much sense to anybody, you know, unless you're unless you're really into that scene.
I mean, totally. So going back on his childhood, I'll touch on this really quick. He initially was inspired by Rocky Marciano. I mean, growing up, you said he was born around 1950, so that would make sense too for a child, you know, with sports stars. And if you had an interest in boxing, Marciano being the heavyweight champion around that time. Yeah. So I get that. And also too, as I said on his box rec, he in 1960 he won an award for the best stamp and baseball card collection. Still at the age of 10. So I wonder if he actually kept those baseball cards because if he had an impressive collection back in 1960, those shits are probably worth crazy money today.
And
But
believe it or not, some stamps are too. Like I don't collect any of that shit, but I know that some people who seriously do have some shit that's worth money.
that is true. I remember I used to like stamps when I was a kid. We used to have like stamp fairs and stuff at my elementary school. And I remember buying like a collection of like Black History stamps because they were just like beautifully done, like painted and stuff. You know what I mean? Of like their portraits. And I remember seeing like a Joe Louis stamp and other ones. I don't know. I thought they made cool ones over the years. But regardless, he was, you know, he was a stud and stamp collecting and baseball card collecting as a kid. And so
That generation's Pogs and comic cards and fucking
yeah. And so even though he admired Rocky Marciano, eventually, you know, he started really admiring Muhammad Ali, which, of course, he would still be relatively young when Ali first came on the scene. He'd probably be a teenager when, yeah, he was a teenager when Ali first beat Sonny Liston in '64. So he starts admiring Ali. He started calling himself the White Ali, and if you see him, Ali was an interesting looking guy. He looked like he stepped right out of the 1970s with the mustache, with the hair that he has going on right there. Like, what would you even call that? Is that a perm that he has?
I mean, I guess it's like almost a like an attempt at a white dude fro or something like
Yeah.
that. Like it's I guess I don't know. I mean, it's pretty typical, I guess you would say, from a lot of white porn stars of the
Yes.
90s.
He
Yeah, I
looks like
mean
a
it's
cross.
honestly somewhat typical though as far as look.
He looks like a cross between like Ron Jeremy and there was a drummer,
It's pretty
yeah,
accurate.
yeah, Ron Jeremy and a legendary drummer actually, jazz drummer named Marty Morell, who used to play with Bill Evans. And if you're curious of what he looks like, just Google Marty Morell and Bill Evans in the '70s, and it's an exact carbon copy. The mustache, the hair, the whole look, the probably the way they dressed, the whole everything. Anyways, Migliorato, started dancing and copying Ali's style, doing the Ali shuffle, trying to box like him, the hands down, moving around, shuffling, everything like that. As a lot of guys did back then, you know what I mean? But the difference with Al and others is that Al actually had he had a chance to face Ali in an exhibition in 1972 when, Ali's early comeback after the exile. So this is after Joe Frazier, after the first Joe Frazier fight, obviously, and this is probably around the time when Ali becomes NABF champion. If it's 72, that's when he became NABF champion, finishes Floyd Patterson's career, fighting guys like Al Blue Lewis and, Mac Foster and others around that point before eventually losing to Ken Norton and, so on and so forth. But yeah, he has an exhibition with Ali for 4 rounds in Pittsburgh in February of 1972. And that the local commission told him that he told him that the commission said that he was for that the I'm tongue-tied over here. It's been a minute. The commission said that Al had to turn pro. According to Al, the commission said that he had to turn pro after the exhibition with Ali. And this is going to be a running thing now with Al, is that like he claimed as an amateur that he was 28-0 with 28 knockouts. None of that is all of this is what's the word? Substantiated?
Unsubstantiated or
Yeah, unsubstantiated, right? Yeah. And I mean that's a pretty glossy record to begin with, and clearly one that's been fabricated. And not only that, would go on to say that amongst the 28-0 with the 28 knockouts that he scored, one of them was against Dwayne Bobbick, who at the time, and I mean, listen, like if you think of Bobbick in the late 70s and the bumbling guy that got knocked around by, assortment of heavyweights, you'd be like, oh, whatever. But this wasn't that type of Bobbick. Dwayne Bobbick in
yeah,
1972
he was like
was,
the top amateur.
yeah, in the US. I mean, if he wasn't fighting Teofilo Stevenson, which he actually did beat him in their first fight, I believe, but that dude was an absolute menace. All right. Got to give it to him. Bobbick was just like a steamroller and he blew out Larry Holmes. He beat up Nick Wells, who was knocking out everyone else around there. And just basically beat up everyone else. I mean, he lost here and there. He was knocked out cold by Ron Lyle. But I mean, other than that, Bobbick was the guy back then. So I kind of find it hard that Al was able to knock out Bobbick. And not only if that happened, I'm sure there'd be accounts of that fight happening if Bobbick were to be knocked out. You know what I mean? So there's that. But what we do know is that um, after that, Migliorato did turn pro around 1972 or so, soon after the Ali exhibition. That's definitely true. And from there, he was around 4-0 and 5-0 before he got signed by the Dundees. Presumably after Angelo or one of them caught him in the exhibition with Ali and thought that maybe he had a little bit of promise there. So soon after that, he relocates to Miami.
Well, and that's the story that they went with too. Um, Basically, here, like in that interview that I was talking about, this is what it says. Um, Migliorato's manager, Angelo Dundee, agrees that the 20-year-old heavyweight has the potential to go far. Although I think that at this point he probably was 23 or 24. He wasn't 20. So I think they just had his age a few years off or something like that. But anyway, he says, I just have to calm him down. He's got a lot of potential and he's for real. Whether or not Migliorato is for real, he has captured the imagination of the Miami Beach fight crowd the way Muhammad Ali once did at the same age. Um, as an amateur in Wampum, Pennsylvania, Migliorato was called the White Muhammad Ali. His act is the same, the dancing and taunting in the ring, the poems, the speed and the good looks. But unlike Ali, he admits it's an act. And then they kind of talk a little bit to Chris Dundee and Angelo Dundee. And basically, like they talk a little bit about the exhibition, but they kind of gloss over it. And on that BoxRec page, that's pretty much what you said, that according to them, that they'd seen him box an exhibition with Ali, and that after that they had decided to sign him and thought that he had some promise. Nothing really much beyond that, though. I will say, especially because you commented on it, because his amateur record and stuff like that. And that's not to call anybody liars. That's not to say that anybody's like a, piece of shit or anything like that.
What's up?
But it's just to say that I hope people realize, even boxing fans, because I don't really think they do, that amateur records are like self-reported. They're not like the vast majority of amateur fighters are not. They don't have their records and fights tracked like BoxRec. Like there might be some tournaments that are reported on. There might be, and there actually have been historians over the years who have compiled amateur records like to the best of what they could find in newspapers and shit like that, so
Mhm.
that those aren't self-reported. But point being, for instance, Kid Chocolate, his manager said that he was undefeated as an amateur when we know for sure, based on Cuban newspaper reports, that is not true. Ray Robinson, famously undefeated as an amateur. We know for certain that is absolutely not true, etc. So, point being that he could have said anything. He could have said I was 50-0 as an amateur. I blah 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 it could have been anything. So almost certainly fabricated. But I will say I do think that there is kind of some credence to his claim about being told that he has to turn pro,
Sure.
because in theory, in an exhibition, you could make money. It doesn't count against your record, but you can get paid for an exhibition. And if you can get paid to fight, then
Mhm.
technically you are a professional. You are no longer an amateur. Just like, if you're an artist and shit like that, and somebody goes, "Oh, I'm just an artist." Somebody gave them 50 bucks for a painting. You're a
Yep.
professional artist now. You know what I'm saying? Like you could be
Totally.
10 years old, but you're a professional artist. Anyway, so I'm not saying he's right or wrong, but I could kind of see that for sure. Point being, though, when he did turn pro and it was 1972, he was probably closer to about 23 or 24 than he was 20 years old, nonetheless young. And his actual pro fights were verified, so it's not like
Mhm.
nobody saw him. And I will say that there didn't seem to be too many reports going, "Oh, this looked funky, this looked fishy. He was knocking out dudes and they're flopping all over," or anything like that. It sounded like he really was genuinely, at least he was at least fighting hard. He
Yeah.
was punching hard and shit like that. What the fights actually looked like, I couldn't say.
Good point. And also to touch one more thing on the amateur thing, on the amateur records and all that, especially back in like the 60s, 70s, 80s, even in the 90s. Um, those dudes were fighting a fuck ton back then as an amateur. Like if you were an amateur in the United States, active and during the 70s and 80s, I mean, you were fighting every week, sometimes multiple times during that week, and like it was look at some of the guys that turned pro after after the Olympics were boycotted in 1980. For instance, like go on BoxRec and look at their records because like those are kind of filled up, you know what I mean? Like, but there's still missing patches of them. Like you see a guy like Jackie Beard, for instance, they'll say like, 60 something wins or whatever losses. No, that dude had over 400 something amateur fights, way over that if that amount. You know what I mean? Like well over. All those guys did, and that's why a lot of them actually burned out as pros relatively quickly because they had all those amateur fights. But it's almost impossible to verify a lot of that stuff back, especially back then when there was nothing like really of record keeping aside from the Ring Record Book,
And,
which we
and
found out.
and the more rural you got, the more the more
Yeah.
remote it got, the more difficult it was to find the records and shit.
And with Al making a claim saying that he knocked out Dwayne Bobbitt or he did this and that, who's gonna, really follow up on that or it'd be like, oh well, if he says it, he says it. Like no one really gave a shit. I mean, it seemed like, if someone told Bobbitt about it, he probably was like, who? And then went about his business again. Like, it was just kind of a claim to make. But it would be, and, it's a claim though that would actually get him attention. So that's what Al seemed to be a type of guy. That was like he knew how to get attention. You know what I mean? In various ways, as we'll see as we talk more, even so after his career ended. But like Al was an attention seeker, and calling himself the White Ali and basically taking your style and completely copying Ali from it and then doing this. And like you said too, as he turns pro, he becomes a fan favorite in Miami. Like, he's fighting very questionable opposition, but like
Dude, this article called him Ali Migliorato.
that's actually great. That's fantastic.
Yeah, dude. It just reminded me of fucking back in the 1960s, not too long after Ali had like really kind of hit the scene and shit.
Yeah.
Like I mean, like really right when he hit the scene at 64 and 65, there was another heavyweight. You'll recognize his name, but some others might not. Dick Whipperman,
Yeah.
who was around in the 1960s or so, and basically he called himself the Jewish Cassius Clay. Not like Yeah, like what he didn't look anything like him. He didn't fight anything like him whatsoever. Like he was literally like the most clinchy, like scared heavyweight on the face of the planet. And in any case, my point is simply that there were so many people trying to say that they were the ex Ali. You know, they were the white Ali. I'm the Latino Ali. I'm the fucking Cuban Ali. You know, there was like any version of Ali you can think of. Somebody was trying to claim that shit because that's how popular Ali was, and they saw that if they could try to borrow a little bit from his act, that
Mhm.
maybe maybe they would a little bit would rub off on them. Maybe they'd get a little bit of that fucking cheddar and shit. And I don't blame them. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's exactly how it goes. But so kind of getting back to his career a little bit, he actually so he got through gosh, let me look really quick because I had it tallied up a second ago, but I totally forgot. Here. It was where is this foo on his record? So a dude named Lou Rogan was the first person to defeat him. Okay, Migliorato was 28-0-2
Mhm.
when he first lost. So I mean that's a respectable record. And again, just to reiterate, the vast majority of the people that he was fighting were like not recognizable whatsoever, and the vast majority of them were fighters who had either losing records, were making their pro debut, and were kind of just like fighting around in and around the Miami scene, or even worse. And I don't mean to say worse like these are terrible places, but like in terms of just not being boxing towns and probably not having a whole lot of talent, like the more rural parts of Georgia, and then going up into more rural parts of Florida and shit like that. And so, for instance, one of the dudes that he fought 4 different times was a guy who has probably the best box rec profile photo on the face of the planet currently, unless there's some other that I'm aware of, and it's a heavyweight named Ron Casey. And I'll let you tell the story about his profile photo, but in any case, Migliorato fought him 4 different times.
And that's an interesting thing, and that's what I mean about the Miami boxing scene. I mean, to touch on that really quick is that back then there was a like in boxing in general, like, you can get away with just having sketchy names and changing aliases and doing this and doing that, and no one would even really know what the hell was going on. And especially in Miami, of course, there was a lot of guys, there was popular names over there too. Like we had, obviously you had Ali and you had the other big names from the Fifth Street Gym. And then also you had guys like, how was that? James Scott, who turned pro and was making a scene in was making his name in Miami initially as a pro before he went to jail at Rahway. Or, or just generally, like a lot of fighters from that time period, right? But aside from those names, there was a whole other seedy side of like the Miami boxing scene where the Dundees had a bunch of these different random dudes who they just kind of sometimes came in off the street or wherever, just walked into the gym because the gym was close to where they would hang out. They work out over there and then somehow just kind of became fighters. And that was the case of Ron Casey. So Ron Casey was a fighter. I don't even really want to call him a fighter. He was an individual. Let's call him that. It's a known individual, a guy, a character that was around the Miami Overtown section during the 60s and stuff. In the 60s initially, because that's when he started his career. Um, been, into a lot of different bar brawls, street brawls, relatively just getting in trouble all the time, stuff like that. And so while working as a dishwasher at a place called Howie's Bar and Lounge, I believe, they someone came up to him and was like, "Yo, man, why don't you make money for fighting?" And he said he took it up on a lark because, well, whatever. And he never really had any formal training. He was trained at one time by Bo Jack, another famous all-time great fighter who ended up in he was from Miami, wasn't he, Bo Jack? Oh, no, he was from Georgia.
Yeah, he's from Georgia,
Yeah, but he
which
ended
is
up
which is just above Florida, of course. So pretty close by. But
okay, yeah, and then he ended up in Miami after his career ended, shining shoes the way he did before his career started, and like working out at the Fifth Street Gym as a trainer and doing things like that.
yeah,
So he was trained by Bo Jack at one time. He was trained by Sonny Emery, I believe his name was, something like that, and also he was handled by a guy named by the name of Benjamin Evil Eye Finkel. And this is one of those characters that are like only kind of localized in that area, like in Miami. But the guy was like a legendary person in that area. Like a lot of people talked about him, and his whole thing was he wasn't so much, a boxing savant and can like give you good instruction like a Ray Arcel or something like that. He was just the dude who was around the gyms all the time. And apparently what they call him Evil Eye, he had this weird eye where he would be able to like if he flashed it on you or you looked at it or something like that, he was putting a hex on you and then the guy he was handling was supposed to win the fight. So Evil Eye was with Casey for like two of the Migliorato fights, and both times he got knocked out in the first round anyways, but Ron changed his name I think 3 or 4 different times, and that's why he was able to fight Al and go on this little road show with him. I almost want to think that these two knew each other somehow beforehand. That I don't know if they knew each other, if like Al knew him from like the gym or saw him around somewhere and was like, hey, let's do this, or it was after their first fight where Al was like, hey, maybe we can take this around somewhere, like whatever it was. But Ron Casey got knocked out by him the first time by his name, Ron Casey. Second time he got knocked out, he was Kid Reed, Reid. Another time he got knocked out by him, he was Kid Reed, Reed. And then the last time he was knocked out by him, he was called Kid Reco, Reco. So there you go. Like he had 4 different like aliases right there that he used to get knocked out 4 different occasions by Al Migliorato. But so those were the type of opponents that Al was fighting. Not all of them. I mean, it was but that was basically the bread and butter of it. And with Ron Casey, getting back now to talk about his box rec profile photo, aside from his career, which he never won a pro fight, by the way. I think he was knocked out in every one of his fights, had maybe a dozen or so, but lost all of them, and never went more than like 3 or 4 rounds. Like you can clearly tell he would just kind of go in there, get a paycheck, and leave. Like he wasn't trying to go in there and try to do anything big. His Aside from getting knocked out various times by Migliorato, he also lost to Jimmy Robinson, who was best known as being the Muhammad Ali opponent that completely disappeared off the face of the earth. Remember that story that ESPN wrote about him
Yeah.
way over a decade ago?
Yeah, that was a while back because that
Yeah.
was like the only one that they could like not locate or
Yeah, because there was a collector who collected autographs of all of Muhammad Ali's opponents, which is, that's actually a pretty cool thing to try to do, but difficult when you think about some of the guys the earlier Ali opponents or, whatever, people passing away, yada, yada, yada. But Jimmy Robinson was the only one he couldn't get because, like we said, he disappeared off the face of the earth in 1979, completely vanished, and no one ever saw him again. And so back to Ron Casey, he also lost to a guy named Solomon McTeer, who was a known Miami fixture heavyweight around that time, for something called the Soul Brother heavyweight title. So I don't know if I ever became Soul Brother heavyweight champion, I'd go around defending that all over the place in bars in various places everywhere. You talking to the Soul Brother heavyweight champ? The fuck you want to do about this, huh?
I
But
mean, why not just parlay that straight into wrestling, to be honest? I mean, fuck it.
straight up. But so Casey has what would you call that? A caricature?
I guess a cartoon or I mean,
Yeah, it's
just
like a
it's a
cartoon. Like it's a really actually really nice photo. Like a really good drawing. I'm not gonna front. Whether it looks like him or not, I'm assuming it does, but there's no actual known photos of Casey. And it's a cartoon of him that apparently was hanging in a seedy ass place called the Bucktown Pool Hall in Overtown, where Casey used to hang out, with his other buddies and stuff like that. Probably Jimmy Robinson, because Jimmy Robinson was a big pool hall guy that hung out in Overtown as well. Anyways, Casey had various gaps in his career where he took long periods off during his career because, well, like we said, he took up boxing on a lark, and when he wasn't doing that, he was getting into fights, which meant he was stabbed and shot multiple times. And he said he was stabbed like 9 times or something like that, and shot 6 times, or vice versa, whatever it is. That's ridiculous to say. That's ridiculous. And he ended up getting killed in a pool hall brawl around like 1978 or 1979. But that photo, which is his box rec photo, was hanging in that pool hall, I guess, for a number of years. So that's the story on Ron Casey and how it ties into Al Migliorato. But
it's just a fantastic photo, and it's not even a photo; it's a cartoon, and that is the only thing we have to identify him at this point.
yeah, and there's really nothing else on there about him aside from you know, him being tied to Al and just having that interesting backstory behind him too. Like I'm actually glad that BoxRec had that on him because like I'm surprised, I'm not sure where they got that info, but it's good. It's really good info on an interesting guy. But yeah, I wonder how they just that dog and pony show. Was it like after their first fight, Al was like, "Hey man, we can do something like this. Let's just take this show on the road." And Ron was like, "Sure, I'll just change my name. Fuck it. Like who's gonna check?"
I mean, well, and we've talked about this before, and you kind of touched on it a moment ago, but like long gone are the days where you could fight under an alias or fight under, a pseudonym. I
Hmm.
mean, shit, the last one that I could really think of is Young Dick Tiger, because
Yeah,
that dude, and that was what, like in the 90s. So,
that
and
wasn't
that,
yeah.
and I mean, like even then, like they were still, I think, probably saying his real name, but like
In the 80s, you had young Joe Lewis, the
yeah,
cruiserweight.
yep, that's right. And but I mean, point is, like they were already kind of rare by then.
Yeah.
Like that didn't happen very often. And obviously, you could see the clear issues that would arise in terms of like what we're just talking about. Fighters
Yeah.
switching identities and shit like that. There's old stories about fighters who had brothers sending their brother on into the ring and shit. You know what I'm saying? Like there's all sorts
Mhm.
of anecdotes about that kind of stuff. So you could see why there would be a problem fighting under pseudonym, but this was still during that time, the last days of when you could do that type of shit, really. And so that Miami scene though really shouldn't be underrated. There were a lot of fighters, it really stretches to like Jeff Sims, like Jeff Sims
Yes.
that
Yeah.
was later, but he is a really great example of just kind of like the chaos and the chaotic heavyweights that were around that scene during the 1970s, especially. I think it probably wasn't as bad during the 1960s when they were really fighting to get legitimacy for Muhammad Ali and probably trying to, fight for legitimacy in the gym a little bit too.
Sure.
But that being said, going into the 70s, the scene changed. The scene changed drastically. And so we see a lot of the people we've been talking about, Ron Casey, a lot of those types of figures hanging around the Miami scene. And I
Hmm.
mean, just it's a volatile scene for heavyweights, really, when it comes to just clashing personalities and just the potential for trouble. And so there was a lot of trouble at that point. I will say I don't really know how much trouble Al Migliorato got into because there's not a whole lot publicized about it. So I can't, this is not, that's why I don't
Yeah.
really
He
like
didn't seem like he didn't seem like a troublemaker. He just seemed like a
yeah,
guy that was just having his career. Yeah.
that's why
Like
I
he wasn't
hesitate to
really
call
involved in
this
it except fighting those type of guys.
that's why I hesitate to call this like a true crime episode because it's not really like there's not really
No,
anything going on that's
it's
bad.
just
It's
a
just
fascinating story.
the
Yeah.
backstory and the backdrop of the Miami scene is what's bad. And
Yeah.
so, did that have some effect on him? I don't know, maybe, but it's more just that like he operated during this time. So he probably did he see seedy shit? I'm sure he did. Was he involved in some seedy shit in the boxing sense? Yeah, probably just by nature of being on that scene at that time. But like he didn't seem like a bad guy. It just seemed like he was a heavyweight fighter who was probably under-equipped and undersized, but he made the most of his personality and tried to go forward nonetheless and tried to kind of make something of his career in the absence of Muhammad Ali as, the reigning champion, et cetera, et cetera. So, in any case, point is going into the mid 70s, it really seems as though, like, what changed? I don't know. But again, if you start looking down at his record, go onto BoxRec and just kind of go through, look, debut, 1-1-0, debut, 0-1-0, 1-1-1, 1-2-1, debut, 0-2, debut, 0-3, debut, 4-13, 0-4, 0-5, 0-6, debut. These are not seasoned opponents that he's bowling over. And so it seemed as though from the interviews that he's intelligent enough to know that, but he's selling himself pretty hardcore with the personality and doing that type of stuff. The problem is that this guy that he steps in with in 1975, a guy named Lou Rogan, who is also not a very big heavyweight whatsoever and does not have a good record and didn't go on to really accomplish anything. He loses to Jimmy Young, uh, Harold Carter. It's so there's clearly, respectfully, loses to Scott Ledoux, pretty much anybody with any sort of quality whatsoever. Then this is the guy that knocked Al Migliorato out. The funny thing is, according to reports going into this fight, like 2 weeks before the fight, they had some sort of press conference. Because why the fuck would you have like a press conference? You know what I'm saying? It's like Al Migliorato versus Lou Rogan, and they have a press conference. But at the press conference, Al Migliorato had apparently gained a reputation by this point because apart from the antics of like, he's trying to be
Yeah.
loud in the ring and talk and stuff like that, he was predicting the rounds that he was stopping his opponents in. And
Mhm.
so he predicted, oh, this is going to be a second round knockout. And so the post fight report was like, Ali Migliorato does it again. It's a second round knockout, except it's him that got knocked out.
Oh
I'm like,
no.
damn, dude, they cooked his ass in the fucking post fight report. So, I mean, my point is also that there seemed to be some acknowledgement or recognition that, like, it's a joke. Like, he's not fucking Ali. Nobody thinks he's Ali. Nobody
Mhm.
fucking, nobody's going to be mistaking him for anything like that in anytime soon. And he goes right back to bowling over chumps pretty soon after that. But then again, he gets in 1977 with a dude named Gene Edelet, who's not good either, just again experienced. That's it. And so I think it becomes pretty clear by his third loss that Migliorato, that is, that this was all kind of a put on. That he was not a good fighter, really.
But it has to be said though, the reason why he got placed in the Ring magazine as a prospect to look out for is because he did score a legit win. If you got to look at his career, there was one there, and he did fight a guy by the name of Dave Matthews, who was highly, I'm not going to say rated, but highly touted at that point, who was a former AAU national light heavyweight champion. He had
Hmm.
beaten Mike Corey as an amateur. He was turned pro with fanfare and was like undefeated for like the first good, was undefeated for a little bit for like his first year and a half as a pro or so, and then. Eventually, he's lost a couple of decisions, but he was still competitive. Like he lost a decision to future light heavyweight champion John Conti when Conti was still because if you remember, Conti first campaigned as a heavyweight when he turned pro, and then when he fought on the undercard of an Ali fight, I want to say Ali Evangelista or something like that. He talked to Ali afterwards, and Ali was like, "Bro, go to light heavyweight. Like you're way too small for this." And he did, And soon after that, and I think he also lost the decision to Jack O'Halloran. But those were names, you know what I mean? And by the time he fought Al Migliorato, like he was supposed to beat him, And instead, Al surprised everybody because he was faster than him and he hit harder, obviously, and he blasted him out pretty impressively.
Yeah.
And
And that was kind of, I guess, I don't want to just talk about Al Migliorato like he's a total piece of crap or
of course
something
not.
like
No, no,
that.
no, no, no. I'm just
But
saying,
it's
yeah,
just that there's a clear difference between when somebody can fight a little bit and when somebody's
yep,
like world class. And so,
absolutely,
and that's not to say that anybody in this situation was world class necessarily, but obviously Dave Matthews, if you're winning amateur tournaments at that level, you're obviously going to have some kind of skill, some kind of ability. But what Al Migliorato had going for him was that apparently he had earned a reputation for being a little bit of a dancer, a little bit of like a
yeah,
clowner or whatever in the ring. He has a whole bunch of knockouts, but like what he would do is he'd fuck around for a round or two and then like lash out and then get a stoppage type of thing. And
hmm,
since these fighters that he was fighting sucked, he'd get the stoppage.
yeah,
But then he, like with Dave Matthews, what apparently had happened was he just blitzed him. Like he just like caught him off guard. Dave Matthews thought he was going to be coming out and like dancing, and he didn't. And so he just went straight at him and just like stopped him. And people were like, "What the fuck? Like,
yeah.
where did that come from?" And so that was a big surprise, and that's why he got put in the ring in the first place. But even then, I think there seemed to be kind of like, all right, like let's see where this kid goes. We don't really know too much about him, type of thing.
Sure.
But even so, making it to new faces in the ring, that's not nothing. That means somebody's got their eye on you.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there was a clear difference between making it as a new face in the Ring magazine, where, I mean, there's been a lot of guys who made it that were featured as new faces that just kind of petered out and,
Yeah,
didn't
but
become
the
much of
majority of
anything.
them. Yeah.
But usually, yeah, you had to be somebody to get to make a new face in the ring compared to, say, like Boxing Illustrated, because some of those guys I saw that they profiled, especially in the 90s, I'm just like, what the fuck? Did you know that? I mean, seriously, bro. Like, there's one issue, not to veer, of course, too much, but there's one issue from like the mid '90s where they profiled Don Steele. Remember that guy?
Dude, well,
Talk
and
about a
there's
guy with an inflated amount of knockouts that fucking sucked.
even,
But
and
like,
as much as
I
I love
legitimately,
KO, even bro, dude, there's a handful of issues of KO where I'm like, why did they interview him? Like,
yeah,
what? So there were some kind of head scratchers where it's like, what, damn, dude, were they really just like scraping the barrel for this shit? But in any case, I don't mean to say like Migliorato's totally sucked or, or anything like
Well, by
that. It's
all
just that,
accounts, like they said, he had skills and he was fast and he could hit hard. But I mean,
but it was fluffed
clearly,
up. It was
yeah,
fluffed up a lot.
yes. And also, too, it was clearly shown that he couldn't take a good punch because he starts getting sopped left and right by guys who normally wouldn't, be knocking people out like that. Like, they're, let me go back to his box rec really quick. Who was it? You said Eugene Idolette, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. Like guys like that. Like Eugene Idolette is a name that you would recognize, but it's a name because it's littered by him getting beat up by everybody else.
exactly.
You know
Exactly.
what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, he's on a bunch of records, but not winning.
Exactly. Yeah, you know what I mean? And like you said, Clyde Fussell was only his debut, and it kind of goes on from there. His career,
And he was 40. Clyde Fusell was 40
yeah,
making his debut and knocked him out. You know what I mean?
sure.
Not a good sign.
And so he goes on until 1975. He loses to a guy named Lou Rogan, who I'm not even familiar with looking at his record. And from there, actually, the only other person I do recognize from there after that is John L. Johnson. If I believe it's the same John L. Johnson, it is. Yep. John L. Johnson was best known. Actually, he was another guy from the Miami scene who looked like he had promise initially early on. And I think he was undefeated when he fought James Scott in James Scott's first pro fight. And Scott went in there, got dropped by John L. Johnson early, got up and then just ravaged him and basically ruined his career after that. Like Johnson was just never the same. So that's about it.
Yeah, it's not looking it's not looking good, dude. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a reason why they're matching Migliorato with, uh they're matching him soft. Like he's not getting matched hard and moving up the ladder whatsoever, and on his record. And also on top of that, it sounded like very shortly after that loss to Lou Rogan, he split ways with the Dundees and wound up going elsewhere. And
Mhm.
so he was under new management and trying something else for his career, but it didn't work out. And look, dude, there's really nothing all that spectacular about it not working out. And this is something that I try to emphasize, and we've talked about numerous times on various shows. A lot of these fighters that we talked about when they are famous, this is like the top 1% of boxing. The
Yep.
vast majority of boxing, it's an iceberg. And the vast majority of the iceberg is under the water, and it's dudes who are nobodies. Dudes who you've never heard of, dudes who you never would hear of, dudes who you in normal life might not care about, et cetera, et cetera. And so, in any case, boxing's filled with unfulfilled promise, dude. It's
Mm.
filled with fighters who thought they were somebody and learned the hard way or perhaps the easy way that they're not. And
Yeah.
so, there's nothing really all that spectacular about a guy named Al Migliorato who ends his career at 39 4 and 2, 34 knockouts, having defeated, maybe one or two notable opponents tops. And basically he moves on with his career. And apparently what had happened was that during that kind of last portion of his career in the late 70s and early 1980s, he was a guy that what he had said was he was a guy who had like gotten into sports in general, and he enjoyed being physical and doing outdoor shit and blah blah blah.
Hmm.
And so he had actually started umpiring for a local minor league team in Florida. And so he lived, I think it was like right outside of Orlando. And I mean, people also have to kind of understand about Florida. I don't know if you've ever been to Florida or ever even looked at it somewhat closely on a map. But, for instance, being from Southern California, everything's so fucking spread out. It's huge. You have to have a car. You have to, like there's nothing's fucking close to each other. And so, but then you like look over at Florida, and that's not to say you can walk everywhere, but the like Tampa, Orlando, Miami Beach, like all of these places are in like a really concentrated fucking kind of South Florida area. And
Hmm.
so, in any case, a lot of his shit went on during Miami, but he lived kind of near Orlando, which is not that far from Miami, blah, 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 blah. So, he had umpired for this minor league baseball team. And there were a couple funny anecdotes from his days doing that too. One that you had told me, and then is on his box rec page too, that they kind of Actually, he had gotten into the paper a couple times as an umpire.
He did, and he also, in a little after his career, so he retired around what, like 1980, 81 or something like that. And in 1982, there's a paper called the Evening Independent where Migliorato talked about his career. And he said it again. This is him, making up tall tales, like kind of adding well, I'm not even gonna say sprinkles of lies because some of these are just like, what the hell are you coming with on this? But like over here, but again, it keeps his name out there, and as a person who was an empire and doing things like that, this would actually inflate his record because besides having ring record books, how many people are going to try to verify this? They're just going to kind of go with it. And so he said he had a record of like 52-3. He said that he had defeated Ron Stander at one point. And I guess with people, if you even recognize the name Ron Stander, you knew it had a ton of losses. You were like, oh, well, maybe Al did beat him one day. Who knows? But then he also curiously said that he beat Randy Stevens, who was a cruiserweight contender in a very smallish heavyweight that is probably most known for like the late 70s getting beat up by like Ken Norton and a couple others before he moved down and became a cruiserweight contender during the 80s. But like, so he said he beat Randy Stevens. He said he beat Ron Stander, claimed that he was 17-0 with 16 knockouts as a lightweight, and said that if Dwight Muhammad Cowie wouldn't fight him, then he was going to stay an umpire and he was just going to stay an umpire and focus on his baseball career. So you can almost take the sense that, like you said, he knows how to talk well. He's a smart guy. And while having this interview, building himself up as an umpire, he's building up his past career, even though he's inflating the hell out of it and making up straight up lies. But he knows that this is also going to just put attention on him being an umpire. So whatever.
And I mean, it worked because
Yeah.
he got into the paper a handful of times. And I mean, some of it was for like mundane shit too, like for calls that he made during games that were just like a deciding factor in the game or something like that. Like nothing that he was a bad guy or anything like that. But point being that I guess he was very involved in like local athletics and was a friend to the athletics department at his son's high school.
Yeah.
So he got involved also. He had a high school aged son who played football, and he got involved to some degree with that because a bunch of the school officials knew him ahead of time.
Yeah.
And to what degree, I don't know. I really don't
Uh,
know.
Oh, I was gonna say though, as before, because I think I know where you're going with this. I was gonna say while as an empire, because we said that an umpire, he made a couple of headlines again too, outside, not just boxing wise, but there was one time in the mid '80s, I forgot the exact date, where Al was umpiring a minor league game or a little league or something like that, right? Like
It was
a
like a
minor
charity
league
game or
or
something like
a
that.
charity game or doing something, but he was umpiring a game where the game was actually taking a lot longer than anyone anticipated. And that on the field that they were playing on, the Miami Dolphins were supposed to be going out to play a charity game next against, I don't
Or yeah,
know.
that might have been what the charity portion was, but go
Yeah,
ahead. Yeah.
like so Al was like officiating a minor league game, and then there was supposed to be a charity game after that featuring the Dolphins against like the fire department or somebody, I don't know. And the game was taking much longer than expected. And when it looked like the game was finally going to be ended, Al instead called that the guy was safe or something like that, which extended the game even longer than needed to be. So, a few of the people off the field, including the this guy named AJ, how's his last name? Do?
Oh yeah, I saw it on there. It was
Must be Do, yeah. It was a Dolphins linebacker, AJ Do, D-U-H-E. That's how you pronounce it, I think.
yeah, or Duhey or something like that. I
Yeah,
don't
something
know.
like that. I don't know.
Something.
But he he started getting, especially irritated by this because he felt that people were there to see the Dolphins and he was being taken, and then, it was taking longer than they needed to get on the field, and he was pissed about this. So he took it upon himself to go out there and, excuse me, go out and argue with Al about what just happened and tell them to end the game. Al tells them, tries to explain to him that the game is still going on. You have to wait a minute. And AJ, as most athletes are, most athletes do, gets pissed off about this. And by all accounts, starts really like, tearing into Al, not beating him up so much, but just like humiliating him, you know what I mean? Kind of shoving him around, talking shit to him, doing this and that, basically just bullying him and everything. And Al, by all accounts, didn't really do much. Like he just backed off, he kind of whatever and let it happen. And the people that said that they were there, they said they were pretty surprised because they knew Al as like a former boxer, who I'm sure after him talking about his career to everybody inflates his career and his accomplishments. They were like, "Yo, man, he was a former fighter. He's boxed with Ali. He did this. He beat that guy and that guy." And we see him getting like spit on and humiliated by this football player, and he didn't do anything about it. We were just kind of taken aback. And Al, I think, put on a lawsuit, didn't he? Like he tried to sue over it, over damages of being
Yeah.
humiliated and
He tried to sue
all this
like the
other shit.
league and the guy or something like that.
Yeah, but nothing really happened out of it.
Yeah, like it just got dropped because it was
Mhm.
like, no, we don't think so, buddy.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I mean like he had made some headlines even as an umpire, admittedly small headlines, but yeah, unfortunately what really kind of set him apart was yet to come and it was awful. And that's kind of where
Oh, it's horrible.
like
Yeah.
I said, it's not true crime as so much as it was just a tragedy. And apparently, over the last several years of his life, so this incident happened in 1989, and over the last several years of his life, he had gotten licensed to be a skydiver, and he had gone skydiving a number of different times. And so there was a local skydiving school that gave lessons. You take courses or whatever the case may be, and you can be certified, get different certifications for skydiving and stuff like that. And according to this guy who had something to do with the school, Migliorato had contacted him and had wanted to get certified. And so the guy had gotten him some equipment because you, you might be kind of tempted to think that skydiving or parachuting or whatever the case may be, like, oh, you just get like a new parachute every time. You know what I mean? You get like a new backpack or a new whatever. No, that's your shit. Like that's you pack it up yourself or
Mhm.
have somebody do it for you. And so like a parachute, for instance, needs to be folded a certain way, rolled up a certain way, and packed a certain way so that it actually unfurls and inflates when you pull your parachute. Because, it's a fucking important part of reaching the ground safely. And so there's a whole bunch of really technical shit that comes with skydiving, apparently. I mean, I looked this up. I'm not going to skydive and I'm not going to skydive ever. Don't ask. I'm not going to bungee jump or any of that bullshit either. But I did look it up. And so needless to say, extremely dangerous. A lot of technical shit that comes with it. Needless to say, in 1989, there were far fewer regulations about skydiving. And it's not that people didn't know about it. It had been going on for a few decades by that point, but there was also a lot of shit developing too. The technology about developing, the know-how, the experience that people were getting doing it, the cost of fuel, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of shit going on. So many variables when it comes to skydiving that make it dangerous. And so you have to have a shitload of experience to be able to go by yourself, even just jump by yourself. You do tandem jumps and shit like that before you do jump by yourself, where I'm sure you've seen video of somebody like, they're like strapped together and shit like that. And like, so there's like a dude.
Majority of people I've ever seen skydive that I know personally have done it are
Yeah.
always strapped together. They don't do it by themselves.
Because you have to do it X amount of times to even go alone at all. And
Yeah.
most people who have done it once.
Hmm.
For obvious reasons, because it's scary and it's expensive and it's it's not some shit you take lightly. And
Sure.
so, point being, if you go multiple times, that's dedication, it's commitment. And so the guy who had given him this equipment had apparently said that, yeah, I got him this equipment and he used it a few times and then put it in his closet. And so why I don't know, like why he would say that, I don't know. Because it
Hmm.
sounds like Migliorato did make a number of different jumps, but then he just kind of stopped for a while. For several years or for a few years, he hadn't done it. And then all of a sudden, for like the few like weeks or like maybe a month or two heading into this incident, he had done it a number of different times. So I don't know what had happened. And then maybe perhaps it was just something like he had said to his son, yeah, I think I'm going to jump out of a plane and I'm going to arrive at your homecoming game, because his son was a football player on the high school football team. And he's, yeah, so I'm going to jump out of a plane. I'm going to skydive to your football game. I'll land on the field. And maybe that just kind of like got a bug in his ass to start doing it more and get some practice in and shit like that. There was only one problem, and it was a really, really fucking big problem. And the problem was that this game was at night. It was in November, And so, and it was at night. So, November starts getting dark a little earlier, et cetera, et cetera. Less visibility, blah, 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 blah. When it comes to skydiving, apparently that like ratchets up the difficulty by like a considerable amount when it's a night jump for obvious reasons. And it's the same reason why, for instance, like diving, underwater diving, scuba diving, cave diving, anything like that is super dangerous. And that's because, or even piloting, like flying a plane. One of the
Mhm.
reasons why it's super dangerous is because you become super disoriented very quickly when you don't have like the horizon in your fucking view. And so, like, if you don't have your feet actually on the ground, it's
Mhm.
super easy to all of a sudden be like, oh shit, is up down? Is down up?
Yeah.
Where the fuck am I? What's going on? And when you're falling at fucking 200 miles an hour, and it's nighttime and you don't necessarily see too many lights, panic. You know what I'm saying? So this is exactly why night jumps are like considerably more difficult. And then on top of that, in order to do night jumps, you need an extra certification. Even back then, before they were doing shit, you needed extra certification. So in any case, we're kind of setting the scene for a tragedy here, obviously. And apparently, what had happened was, and this is also on that box rec profile, is that he had told people involved, like, we're good. And that was not the case.
Yeah, he like you said back then, so the 80s, I mean everyone that listened to the show was obviously alive during that time, was just
Mhm.
even when we were kids, bro, you were just able to get away with shit without really being questioned back then. You know what I mean? With certain things. Like if you were gonna go somewhere and you kind of told someone, hey, I can do X, Y, and Z for the kids, blah, 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 most people would just kind of like without really verifying it, would just kind of be like, oh, well, that sounds good. Sure. And this is to the extreme, but this is kind of the same thing that happened with this one is that like Al, like you said, he had done a number of jumps. It wasn't like he wasn't experienced doing skydiving in normal, like by himself. He had done that already. But like you said, there was a huge difference between doing it during the day and doing it at night. And initially Al went to he went to the guy, I believe, who taught him how to skydive or was some company. He tried to and he was like, "Yo, can you teach me how to jump at night?" And like, to do this. And the guy told him absolutely not. Because I guess, like, I mean, I'm sure he would have been willing to teach him had Al was like told, like, not told him, like, no, I'm sure he would have been willing to teach him if it was like no, nothing he was trying to do anytime soon. If you'd be like, hey, I just like to learn how to night jump, so eventually one day I can do
Exactly.
this. The guy would be like, okay, maybe I can help you do that. But to tell him, hey, in, I don't know, X amount of weeks, whatever, it's going to be a week or two, I'm going to go jump out of a plane for my son's football game at night. Can you teach me how to do this today? No. Like that, it's just that doesn't work that way. You know what I mean? Like it's extremely dangerous, and he told him that. He was like, "It's way too dangerous to do it. Please do not do anything like that. It's just absolutely insane. Don't risk yourself." And Al, for whatever reason, didn't take that advice and still thought that you'd be able to handle it. And probably went to somebody else who was, willing to agree to do it. You know what I mean? And then went to the school, and like you mentioned earlier, he was like heavily involved with his son at the high school and just being a good parent, and by all accounts he had a really good reputation within the school, within, by the principal and the other people involved and the management and all that stuff. They all loved him. He was a really good parent that was very involved with activities and just all that stuff, being involved with his kid and all that. So like they figured that it wouldn't be a big deal because of his reputation already of just being a good standing individual. And when he had told them, he was like, "Oh, I've done plenty of night jumps before. I'm very experienced doing this," which he's lying, but he's telling them it's going to be all set. They just were like, "Well, that sounds like a good idea to do." And so his idea, what he would plan on doing was on the night of November 3rd, 1989, it was that him and his partner, another guy were going to do a night jump before his kid's football game. So they were going to have a home game at the high school, and Al was going to jump from the plane and land. And what was supposed to happen was he was supposed to land into the football field holding the ball, and he's going to be wearing, a football helmet, and he was going to land in the middle of the field to present the game ball to his kid before the game started. And his partner, I didn't even know he had a partner until we talked about this beforehand. His partner was going to bring down the American flag, correct? And that's how it's supposed to go.
Yeah. Yeah. So they were going to jump, some distance away from the field. And so another thing that I'd read about night jumping was that there's a number of things that people tend to do for night jumps. And that's that they would set up certain lights and light rigs and stuff like that because of the lack of visibility at night and how disoriented you can become so quickly. Now, I guess
Sure.
it might have been a little bit different if there's a big stadium with a bunch of lights. You might be able to see that target and go, okay, that's where I fucking need to go and have a better idea of how to get there. But that being said, that was the plan. So him and his partner, the other dude was going to parachute down with an American flag, woo, and then Al was going to follow him up while wearing a football helmet, apparently, and also having the game ball come down onto the field, give it to his son. And so the first guy came down without a hitch, no problem. And this was apparently a very experienced skydiver who like knew what he was doing,
Sure.
that Migliorato had recruited. And so everybody was waiting, nothing. Everybody keeps waiting, still nothing. The kid panics. His son panics
Hmm.
because he realizes that something's not right because he was supposed to be right behind him. And on top of that, according to reports that had come out afterward, his son had asked him not to do this, that his son had been kind of a little bit reluctant and didn't really want him to do this, but that he said, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's okay." So his son took off. His son drove off because he had apparently heard ambulance sirens. And so his son followed the ambulances, which were in a nearby neighborhood and surrounding the body of Al Migliorato, his main chute had malfunctioned. There had been some sort of issue with his main chute. And so he fell to his death about 3,000 feet. And his emergency parachute never opened. And unfortunately, what's obviously terrible about this is that his kid was one of the first people on the scene. So he was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. So I think he was probably dead when his kid found him too. But it was not good. He got taken by helicopter to the hospital, and yeah, they kind of did a bit of an investigation. That a lot of the details of the investigation are on the Boxrec page. They talk about it, but they go into a little bit more detail in the newspaper. And basically, what had happened supposedly was that Migliorato had fabricated his experience to a bunch of people. His experience skydiving, that is, and it sounds like probably his fighting experience too at a number of different points. But that he had told so when he had tried to recruit somebody to do this with him, supposedly the first person was like, "No,
Hmm.
I'm not doing that. No way. Like that's dangerous and you're not ready." And so they didn't want to do it, and then a pilot didn't want to do it. Like a local pilot was like, "No." And so he had found a pilot to fly them and he found somebody to go with him, but that he had to those people who wound up going with him said, "No, no, I've done night jumps. I'm good. I'm good." And I mean, again, like you said, and we're like we were talking about with boxing careers, who's going to verify anything? You're going to make a phone call to like some dude's friend, and the friend Jim Bob goes, "Yep, yeah, he did. He jumped. Bye." What are you going to do? You know what I mean? How do you verify anything? So he had guaranteed these people, he'd guaranteed the principal, he'd guaranteed the football coach, and he was somebody that all of these people knew. Like he was active in the community, active in the school, et cetera, et cetera. So there's no reason to not believe him. He wasn't a bad guy, he wasn't creepy, wasn't weird, wasn't anything. It's just a normal dude. So he made a terrible miscalculation apparently, and shades of Dummy Mahan, a guy
Oh
who
yeah, yeah.
jumped
Good
from an
call.
airplane decades and decades earlier for completely different reasons, but nonetheless, during not necessarily the height of his career, and neither was Migliorato, but nonetheless a fighter jumping from an airplane, making a terrible miscalculation and dying from it.
Or
And
I mean, it's still a completely different circumstance, but you can even relate it to a degree to like Owen Hart with WWE, where initially, and this is the fault of WWE, was that like initially he was going to be harnessed with the one that he had been put on before, and what Sting in WCW had used to be rafted down from the ring, which was you get down there. I mean, it takes you a couple of minutes to take it off and whatever, but at least you're safe as fuck going down there, right? Safe as you can be. And WWE, annoyed because it took him so long and it looked clumsy getting that harness off or whatever, wanted something quick, right? Anything
Yeah,
super
so
fast.
tried some
So
prototype
they put
fucking.
they put this stupid shackle that's used for sailboats. It only takes like zero point 0.6 pounds of pressure or something stupid to like open. And Owen, plummeted 85 feet to his death right there at the Kemper Arena that night in '99. And
I
so it's
remember
like,
that shit.
yeah, I watched that live. I mean, luckily they didn't show that
Yeah,
happen on
yeah, yeah.
TV, but like, you know,
Yeah, I remember the aftermath. I wasn't watching, but I remember it being like,
yeah.
what the fuck?
Nah, I'll never forget that, man. When they were showing they were about to cut to an interview of him, like a pre interview of him, and you hear Jim Ross go, we have big problems out here," and then they cut to the interview, and then when they come back, him and Jerry Lawler are sitting there, and they're like white as ghosts, and they're just like, bro, But back to Al, it's crazy because like you said, yeah, he did fabricate and tell people that his credentials were much more inflated in terms of his experience of jumping than what they were. And all the circumstances, what night jumping is crazy. And then considering the fact that he wore a football helmet instead of just a normal helmet. And it's like, I understand the idea behind it because you want to be in character and you're doing this whole thing or whatever. But like, bro, you can't wear a football helmet. I mean, even during a normal jump, you shouldn't be wearing no fucking football helmet just because of you need clear visibility of everything and you don't need these bars in your face. And, he's wearing a football helmet and that's one thing. And then they mentioned, because you mentioned that his chute had malfunctioned, the first one. But there's always a backup chute. And when the backup chute was tested afterwards, it came out normal, like it worked. And he just never reached for it. Was it panic? Who knows? I mean, he was also clutching the football when he fell, which again, that definitely wasn't the smartest thing. Like, I'm sure there could have been a way they could have attached it somewhere on him, anything, where his hands would be free to like do what he needs to do. You know what I mean? And I can't, I've, that's an awful way, man. I can't even imagine the fear and the free, like going through your mind what's happening when you're falling and like you said it's dark out and so like you're just propelling down and you can't do I don't even want to like as a person who doesn't like heights like myself that's absolutely insane and that is an awful way to go and I'm really sorry that I feel for him and his family that and especially his kid that had to witness that being the first on the scene and seeing your dad like that. I mean, my God, but like it was an accident that was really preventable, you know what I mean, like really really preventable if someone just with a hint of
And
anything
well
was
intentioned. You
thinking,
know what I'm saying? Like he's trying
hmm?
to make a big entrance. He's trying to make his son look cool. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? Like
yeah.
it wasn't anything nefarious. I get it. I
I
understand.
know, I know, but my dad
But
used to try to do the same shit, but like he would just
damn.
drive me in a limo to school when he had to go pick someone up afterwards. Like it wasn't like he was trying to do something crazy like that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
So
he would pull up in a limo and take the red carpet out, and I would hate that because I was a shy kid. And he'd have his tux on, and kids would be like, "Oh man, who's that? Who's that?" And then he'd be like, "Oh, it's Aris. Oh man, I don't care about."
that's fucking awesome though.
Yeah, but it was tragic, and that's an awful way to go. And he was only 40 years old.
Yeah, dude. And again, if that's true, if he was 40, then he would have been about 23 or 24 for his debut, like I was saying. So
Mm.
not 20 like it's like the articles were saying at the time. But nonetheless, regardless of his age, he left behind a family, he left behind a kid who he was trying to do something cool for, left behind
Yeah.
I mean, how awful would that scene have been for anybody attending the game? It wasn't just his kid too, because one of the other articles, kind of in the aftermath, talked about that like the entire locker room knew him, and that apparently the coach. This is something I forgot to say. The coach knew at halftime. The coach knew like before the game was over that he was dead and that it was like blah blah blah, and the kid tried to go back to play the game, and Yeah, dude, terrible. Like the locker room was in tears and etc. So I mean, really just a horrible incident. It's not something that we're trying to highlight the awfulness of what happened, but just, again, just trying to kind of retell the stories of things people might not know. And especially
And
because it ties so much into those 70s heavyweights in a scene that people might not know as much about.
for sure. And it's for a guy that he passed away so young. Um, would have been interesting had as the years go on, because barring any type of sickness, whatever, presumably he'd still be around today. And yeah, he seemed like the type of guy that would, he was such a character back then that definitely he would have been someone that I would have wanted to share a beer with or something. You know what I mean? And like have some conversations with about his career.
This should
Like,
put him in facing Ali.
yeah, And like those type of things. Like, I mean, there was just a bunch of those guys that, and it's unfortunate now that a lot of them are passing on. That we've talked about others that like Tris Dixon and others that have like gone out of their way to interview these forgotten fighters. The ones that have incredible stories, but they just never had a chance to tell them because they've just been forgotten over time. You know what I mean? Why would you want to talk to Leroy Caldwell, for instance, if you can talk to Ernie Shavers instead? Or one,
Exactly. Yeah.
but like, or Stan Ward or any of those other guys, but they've all passed away now. And then you have a guy like Al who died so young that he never really had a chance to tell his story. I mean, aside from like the interviews that he had in newspapers and anything like that. And who's to say that, in the years of podcasting and YouTube and things, he could have probably would have made himself doing something on that shit. Well, maybe he just would have been like in retirement and been chilling. Who knows? But unfortunately, that's the sad part is that he never had a chance to reach, to do any of that. But it's up to us to tell these type of stories because a guy like Al had a fascinating story. I mean, look what we just told about there. It wasn't the longest longest one that we had to tell. And like you said, it's not really true crime because he never really got into anything bad as far as we know. There's no records of him being a bad person. He just came up during a really crazy time in the Miami boxing scene, had a really interesting story, an interesting look, and for a brief time was talked about in the heavyweight circles for the briefest of moments, but still, it's out there. And then, unfortunately, he had a death that warranted headlines, and kind of sums up, the life of him. So,
And obviously there was more to him than that, which we're aware of, but that's
exactly.
in the boxing context, that's what we know. So, I know it does take a little bit of work. And I mean, it does kind of chip away at you a little bit when you kind of focus on negative things like this
Yeah.
sometimes. I will admit that. But at the same time, as much as we love history, I don't think that it affects us quite as much as the average person might. But hey, man, we just love history. We love retelling it. We love discussing it, all that kind of stuff. So we'll be back with something. I know that we have some stuff kind of cooked up. We're
I
at
mean,
least
we
somewhat
got to talk
healthy.
Hall of Fame pretty soon.
That's true.
So
And
I'll talk about that because Hall of Fame don't come out till December. And I know usually we've done our Hall of Fame recap shows like a month or so ago or whatever it may be, like back in October. But whatever, it is what it is, man. We still have time to do another one, and we definitely have a lot to say about it. All right.
we got some words. That's for sure. We got some
Yeah,
words.
yeah. And we might have some special guests to join us too for that one too. So
We got something
yeah, stay
happening.
tuned.
We'll do something. But in the meanwhile, dude, I again I appreciate you because you obviously bring a lot of knowledge to the show, and it's always fun bullshitting with you, man. I appreciate it.
Same way, man. I love the thing that I love about doing this stuff is that I love retelling these stories, whether it's for the people that listen that have never heard of it or the family member that like will be Googling someone's name and then come across the podcast and be like, "Hey, thanks for talking about my uncle," or something.
Which is what it is like 99% of the time. There's been like maybe one instance where somebody says something weird, but like the
Yeah.
vast majority of the time people are like, "Thank you." So,
Yeah, and I really love that. Like we did one on Jeff Merritt one time and she wrote like, "Thank you, that's my husband's dad." We wanted something on him.
it
Uh,
happens a surprising amount. Like
yeah,
where we're
Mike
like,
McCallum
"Whoa,
one. Someone said they went to high school and was like best friends with him and was so happy to read like just stuff like that. You know what I mean? We like touching people. So if anyone out there that got to hear this episode today, hopefully it hit somebody.
totally." Well, I appreciate it again, man, and When it comes to listeners and viewers, we also appreciate all of you. So thank you so much for listening or watching. If you listened, go ahead and subscribe to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast and give us a rating. Those things are helpful. If you watched, what's up? Thanks for staying on here and seeing how sexy we are, because we also appreciate that. Come on, we're dashing. Don't lie. Appreciate it. Go ahead and subscribe on YouTube. Leave a little comment, and we will see y'all later. Eris talks to you soon, bro.
Have a good one, man.